I had a question a little earlier from a follower. They inboxed me to ask me, how come Antifa or any counter-protesters don't attend the protests of anti-lockdowners? That's right, they asked me that. They asked me, what do yous think about this? And please definitely let me know in the comments if you think I've pronounced that incorrectly. I just love spell check, lefties. Anyway, it's a fair question, and I thought to myself, well, I should probably answer what they asked me to all of you. So here we go. Why don't we counter-protest or otherwise crash the efforts of anti-lockdowners? First, a little caveat, and it's that I don't fucking speak for everyone, if that wasn't already obvious. Anti-fascists tend to organise counters or whatever it is privately and in autonomous cells. There might be a big public rally here or there, or some big Facebook invite to something organised by one person or group or something like that, but the real order of anti-fascist action tends to happen among autonomous cells who aren't necessarily responsible to each other but might be working in cahoots with each other. It follows that I in no way speak for Antifa. I can only give you my perspective or experience on this question, admittedly as an organiser, but only as one. Remember, some of these people don't agree with my history or tactics, or they just don't like me, or some of them don't trust some egomaniac who talks into videos with his fucking head all the time and has a Patreon, who they think is trying to play figurehead for what is essentially an autonomous collectivist movement. And I get all of those concerns. I am not trying to be that guy, but nor am I going to correct them on that. And I'm certainly not going to try and speak for them. With all that being said, I can tell you from my perspective why we don't crash anti-lockdown rallies. So far, 1. We've always tried to discourage things like counters due to many of us actually believing in the merits of participating in collective health measures during a public health crisis. Do you know what I mean? It's always seemed important to me in various ways to limit the time one spends outside or, among great big groups of people. What's more important, though, is that rally isn't just a trip to the shops. Is it? It's a highly documented journey out amongst the media cameras, and that's certainly the case of anti-lockdown rallies. So a few, for example, black bloc people heading out to counter or something like that for whatever reason, it wouldn't just be a private trip to kick certain goals, would it? It would also mean that everyone would see that and they would say, oh, look, Antifa have decided to start countering. Here's the evidence. Or Antifa have joined in, or whatever they could fucking say. And we all know how much disinformation based off of the media footage that gets harvested from rallies that gets bandied about. So it would, regardless, send a public signal. And for my part, I have not to date thought it worth it sending that signal. 2. The movements are a very mixed bag. And if you listen to me a lot, you know I say this all the time. Yes, there are far-right and even fascist dogs at these events. Yes, true. They are types that we would be fucking delighted to counter or interfere with anywhere, anytime. But they do not control the anti-lockdown movement. They try to, and they do try their best to red pill people one by one, sure, but they aren't a winning or a dominating faction in the anti-lockdown movement. In the conspiracist melting pot of those rallies, there is a sizable contingent of people who are of many races and past political persuasions. Yes, they're dumb and they're gullible, I think, and they're politically illiterate enough, many of them, to be potential fodder for those Nazis or those far-right elements. Yes, but what I'm saying is that they're not there yet, and some of them do actually push back. That's the reality of it. I see it happen all the time. What's more, there have been rallies with majority Middle Eastern presence there. There's been anti-lockdown rallies up Brisbane Way, which have been opened up by influential Indigenous families with smoking ceremonies. And the centre-left Twitter set seem to hate acknowledging this fact. They really do. Because they love the ease of, turning up their nose at rallies they don't like and dismissing it all as the work of bad white racists. But not only is that not true, but given at this stage that I've been saying that shit for 18 months and somehow still seem to wind up in arguments with this lot, despite the copious amounts of evidence I've shown to the contrary. At this stage, I think you can just fucking ignore that lot and listen to me. And I'm telling you, there's many there who are conspiracist dupes, but who are not our enemy at all. We have significant disagreements with them, yes, but they are definitely not on the level of fascists. And look, you can't counter 10% of a rally, can you? You're either countering the whole damn thing or none of it. 3, we are ideologically opposed to the blanket hyper-libertarianism of the anti-lockdown lot. I will say this, I'm not opposed to questioning or demanding limitation of certain lockdown restrictions and such, or indeed the rank, gross policing of the pandemic. I think I've made that clear for quite a long time now. And we've had an extraordinary run of limitations on our public movement in this country. It's true. Yeah, it saved us from a deadly 2020 first wave that would have wiped out our most vulnerable. It did so in other parts of the world. There's many thousands of people who didn't die because of that. Thank fuck. Very grateful. But we know that we cannot keep this shit up at this rate. Not forever. And there's many aspects, again, of our lockdown that I resent. We should be accepting more refugees. We cannot lock out Australians, and I don't think we should lock them in either. It doesn't make any sense. Curfews are fucking ridiculous, and they're just one of a number of lockdown-related government restriction policies that target lower-income people like shift workers disproportionately. Lockdowns and this arbitrary and ruthless government restriction shit, they've taken such a dire toll on us. We can't pretend that that isn't true. However, consider what Marxist philosopher and scavenging bin raccoon Slavoj Žižek has to say on this in his book Pandemic 2. Yes, he's really been turning out the coronavirus essay books. The libertarians claim lockdown... I won't do my Slavoj impersonation anymore. The libertarians claim lockdowns should be eased in order to give people back their freedom of choice. That raises the question... what freedom? The free choice is, here, one between starvation and risking your life. The situation is reminiscent of that of an 18th century British coal mine, wherein just doing one's job involved a considerable risk of loss of life. Consider that in addition to the brunt of the force of waves of coronavirus infections, which is borne by underpaid health professionals. Healthcare workers, a group that in the context of the pandemic, Marxist economist David Harvey calls the new working class. They care for people. They aren't paid enough to do it. They're inundated. They're left stranded without adequate protections. I mean, we all saw the media of them having to use garbage bags in 2020 to cover their face in the US to protect them from the virus. They are mostly women, migrants and poor people. They are even left sometimes to take their own lives from what has been unimaginable trauma for the rest of us. Are we talking about their freedom? No, we're clearly not, are we? The anti-lockdown lot imagine themselves when they think of the freedom of absolute movement that they're talking about. They think the real health crisis is the mental health effects of having to stay at home a lot during the pandemic because they are nowhere near the front line. Lucky them. The hyper-libertarian lot don't care enough to even learn where the front line is. That's why I'm ardently against many of the aspects of the lockdowns and the policing of the pandemic, but I could still never call myself an anti-lockdown sort. Long story short, there's many things, individual policies that they might disagree with, and I'm there with them. But regarding their overall bent, no, I don't stand with them at all. And that means I might disagree with them, but I'm not really going to go out there and straight up counter them. 4. There's other shit going on that people can and do get themselves involved with. It's not all about hyper-fixating on fringe conspiracist scumbags. I mean, you might be forgiven for thinking otherwise if you just look at my page all the time. That's just me, though. That's my little personality quirk. Activists have not just sat around, not when they've really needed to. BLM protests around Australia, remember them? They were fucking huge. and nobody got sick at them. Think about the incredible sustained activism of refugee solidarity Meanjin up Brisbane, Queensland way, over a full year of activism to free the KP120, the Kangaroo Point people locked up, refugees locked in mandatory hotel detention. Their activism was dedicated, it was staunch as fuck, it was really sustained, and guess what? It worked, because many of them, some at least, were freed. Consider the dedicated community work of activists like those filthy commies over at the Community Union Defence League, who in Melbourne are trying to feed the homeless as they do whilst getting booted out by coppers. Or in Adelaide, where they're trying to feed the homeless, whilst also getting kicked out by Liberal Party people and the like. Consider the work of First Nations COVID-19 Sydney. These are people who've supported Indigenous communities out that way by feeding over 100,000 meals direct to communities and counting, which is incredible stuff. So what I'm saying is people aren't necessarily staying home. They're just not necessarily indulging the waking conspiracist fantasies of these fucking daydreamers. But for all that, I've had my moments. Last time when they rallied in Melbourne and they abused and attacked people waiting for a vaccine, I fucking fried at that point, and I honestly started daydreaming about what it might be like to stand there and form a line in front of these shitheads. I really, really did, despite myself. But I guess on reflection, I'd regard it as a matter of pest control on a local sort of community level more than anything. For example, if I lived there, in that area, I would really want those pests out of my area. And if I lived there, and especially if I were elevated, like in the city where many of these protests are, I'd probably want to chuck anything I could at those pests to eradicate them from my area, because it would be like trying to discourage rats from infesting my kitchen, with all the disease and such that rats bring. I'm not saying that rats are hyper-libertarian fuckwits, of course, no offence to rats, but, I wouldn't chuck stuff at them to hurt them, but stuff like water and eggs and rotten fruit, vegetables, stuff you might find in the kitchen, the bottom of the fridge, that's soft stuff. Stuff that's enough not to hurt them, but just to humiliate and foul up their personage and discourage their ongoing attendance of my area. Do you know what I mean? I'd do that if I were the resident of an area in which these pests were infesting. I'd coordinate as much throwing of garbage on these pests as is humanly possible to try to protect my community from their blatant disregard for my local community's efforts to stop the virus. And in an attempt to assist healthcare workers and the immunocompromised. That would be my contribution to stopping the spread. That's just my take. Please let me know if you disagree or agree in the comments, because I'm genuinely interested, for one. And secondly, I think this is all really fluid. We could change our mind for very good reasons next month. These cunts aren't off the hook by any means. It's always a changing situation, of course, as everything seems to be during the pandemic. And I really would love to know what you think about this approach in the comments and what your thoughts and ideas are. Anti-Lockdown Ode is a tribute to the anti-lockdown movement and to the freedom that we all have to punch on in Coles. Digital only from Melbourne Fringe 5th to the 10th of October 2021. Buy tickets in the description. And in the meantime, if you love what I do, please support us on Patreon.